Thank you so much, Julie. And thanks everyone for being here. I feel like I recognize a few of you from the last time I taught, and I'm excited to learn about Ki Teitzei with you. Also, fun fact, I was kind of reflecting on the other times that I've taught here and realized this is the third location. I've been in 3 different locations each time I've taught this class, but I'm finally coming to you from my home in Northampton. So hopefully those good homey vibes will radiate out as we study. So I feel like I say this a lot, but I'm going to say it anyway. Ki Teitzei is a great Torah portion. There's so much in here. And as I was kind of finishing up my my whole source sheet presentation thing, I was like, maybe I should have taught something else. So I encourage you, after we're done, if you haven't yet, just, click on, I don't know, Sfaria, My Jewish Learning, and read the whole portion. And there's a lot of gems in this one, I would say. So I know for me, like when I'm writing sermons, I'm always like, oh, what am I going to write about? And this one's a good one because there's lots of good like sermon topics you can pick out. Great. Okay. And so I will say I'm going to share my screen shortly. I will try to monitor the chat. So if you have questions or comments, I encourage you to write those in the chat, and I will try my best to address them either as we go or when I pause. So yes, I encourage you to use that as well. And there will be times where I might ask a question, and if you feel comfortable and you'd like to share out loud, I know Julie can, if you raise your hand, Julie can unmute you. So great. And please feel free to ask questions, tell me to slow down, all of those things. Okay, great. So we are going to focus on just a few verses today, and we're going to really do a very, very deep dive that I'm excited about. And this is one of these, it's kind of iconic what we're about to do today. And so maybe some of you have done it before and maybe you haven't. And if you have, great, let's do it again, right? Just like we study the Torah every year. I think it's great to revisit certain things. So here we go. With that, I will share my screen. Here we go. Oh no, that's not what here. Okay, do you see the presentation? Great. Okay, so here, I thought this was funny. I just wrote this is the title, Carry On My Wayward Son, from that song, Carry On My Wayward. I'm not going to sing it. And you can guess why I made this title later when we go through, and you can tell me if it was a good title or not. Okay, so we are going to be talking about today the Ben Sorer Umoreh, which means it's translated different ways here. In this translation, it's a wayward and defiant son. Okay, so here is our text. This is Deuteronomy chapter 28, verses 18 through 21. I'll read this one for now, and maybe I'll have other people read for a different one. Okay. If a person has a wayward and defiant son who does not heed his father or mother and does not obey them after they discipline him, his father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his town at the public place of his community. They shall say to the elders of his town, "This son of ours is disloyal and defiant. He does not heed us. He is a glutton and a drunkard." Thereupon his town's council shall stone him to death. Ooh. Thus you will sweep out evil from your midst. All Israel will hear and be afraid. Yikes. Okay, so we have this wayward and defiant son, right? The Ben Sorer Umoreh. I'm using that Hebrew because sometimes people will like to bring this up and they'll say, oh, the Ben Sorer Umoreh. So that's the wayward and defiant son. And so they're doing something, this child is doing something that is so bad, right? They're not listening to their parents. And it's so bad that it rises to this level where they decide that this child needs to be killed. And then they get stoned to death. So this is like a pretty grisly little text here. That I know on first read really bothers me. I don't like this idea of like killing children. I don't love killing anyone, but children, right? They haven't grown up yet and haven't, don't have their fully developed frontal cortex to make those good rational decisions and ethical decisions, and we're still holding them to that standard potentially here. So not the most lovely of texts here. And then I guess, so my question at the bottom, if you want to share in the chat, is, so from reading this, okay, right, we see this person who does not heed his father and mother, does not obey them. So what is this crime that sounds like that this child is being killed here? What's it evoking to you? Does it refer to a, Phyllis, do you mean maybe child, are you saying? So here that it's pretty specific that it's a son. And like sometimes I like to translate things in gender neutral ways, but here, as we see some more commentary, we're going to see they're like trying to narrow this category down. So it really is more about a son. But we'll go into this. She said, I wonder if the elders actually gave advice and words of wisdom to the child and parents. Yeah, right. So maybe, right, you're reading into the text here that, okay, there are multiple steps here, that you take them to the elders, and maybe the elders are trying to help in some way, do some type of intervention. And then if that doesn't work, this process continues on. Jenny says, maybe he's a murderer. Maybe. Yeah. I mean, I guess but where does it say that in the text, right? Like, yes, I would also want it to be like, oh, this child did something really, really terrible to deserve this. But like not listening to his father and mother, jumping to murder. Like, I want to know, how do we get there? Meaning adult. Phyllis, you said meaning adult. Yeah. So we're going to look at that. We're going to kind of do, as I said, a deep dive into this to say, like, what does it mean? Because it just says a son. So what does it mean to be a son? Do you have to be a child? Can you be an adult? Where does that go? We're going to come to that very soon. Tanya says rebellion, not honoring his father and mother. Okay, yeah, but like, should we kill the child? I don't know. I know I definitely have had times where I have not honored my father and mother. I'm very glad that I'm not dead. I was not stoned to death. It seems very drastic. I had a very difficult kid, but wouldn't have killed him. Yes, thank you, Ginger. Yeah, exactly. It does seem drastic, and it actually seems drastic to the rabbis as well. So we're going to see what they do with it here. Yes, there's questions about like, what does this actually mean? Yeah, okay, there's great things in the chat. So thank you all for sharing your idea. Grandchildren are God's reward for not killing your teenagers. That's funny. Okay, so right, so there's some level of like, we're a little bit bothered by this text. And is this an analogy for Israel and God? Whoa, that's deep. I hadn't thought about that. I could see why. I wonder if there's like a commentator who said something like that too. I haven't come across that, but yeah, if Israel's not obeying God, there are ideas. This is not my personal theology, right? But there are ideas we especially see in like the book of Judges, right? When Israel is being bad, then they're losing the wars. And things like that. So I could see that. Ooh, could the wayward child be the child of the unloved wife? Yeah, so the unloved wife you're mentioning, Tanya's mentioning, is from kind of like the verses right before these verses that talks about you have like a wife that you like and a wife that you don't like. Interesting. Okay, I'm going to continue on. Please feel free to keep going in the chat. Okay. So there we go. So this is our text. So we're going to keep referring back to this text. So I'm going to just read it one more time to really just like, we're going to just get it in our heads, and then we will continue on. If a person has a wayward and defiant son, right, that's the ben sorer moreh, who does not heed his father and mother and does not obey them, even after they discipline him, his father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his town at the public place of his community. They say to the elders of his town, this son of ours is disloyal and defiant. He does not heed us. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Thereupon this town's council shall stone him to death. Thus you will sweep out evil from your midst. All Israel will hear and be afraid. Okay, so next we're going to see, okay, what is sorer moreh? What is this wayward and defiant? What does this mean, right? So there's kind of a question because it's not clear. So here we have some lovely Torah commentators, medieval commentators. First, we got Rashi, who says soreh means one who deviates from the proper path of life. And this is based on the word deviate, that's translated deviate here, sar. So if you're sorer and sar, they kind of have a similar root. And so that's the clue we're getting. So it means that they're deviating from the proper path of life, which again, that gives us a hint of what it means, but like, what does that mean? And moret means, according to Rashi, one who is disobedient to the words of his father. So one who's not listening to his parents. Okay, I mean, that still doesn't sound so bad to me, right? That's worth getting killed, like you're killing for, but okay. And then Ibn Ezra, another great medieval commentator, says the word soreh is similar to the word sorea, which means stubborn. And so he's saying that stubborn means he does not keep the positive commandments, right? It's this, I think you can, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but the second line, right? He does not keep the positive commandments. And then rebellious here was with regard to the negative commandments. So Ibn Ezra is arguing that a child who's ben sorer moret is someone who doesn't keep the positive commandments or the negative commandments. They're just breaking everything. They're not doing anything. Right? All the things that we say, like you should do, right? The extra things, and also the things we're saying not doing. And if you're breaking the negative commandments, right? Some of those are pretty drastic, right? So there we get that connection to murder, right? If that's a negative commandment, thou shalt not kill. Okay, if you're not following that, that's pretty bad. So there you go. So those are two ideas of what is going on here. But now we're going to continue to look more. So as I said, right, the rabbis are really bothered by this idea of like killing this person. So let's see what they do with it. And when I say the rabbis, I mean the rabbis in the rabbinic period. So we're going to look at some Mishnah and Talmud. I know this is a Torah study, but I love Mishnah and Talmud, so I'm like sneaking it in here. And so they're going to really look and see, okay, like what does it mean? Who is actually a ben sorer or moret, a wayward and rebellious son? Because if we're going to kill someone, we need to make sure that we know, like we have very specific guidelines to what we're going to be doing here. I'm just gonna pause. Yeah, parent should exercise anger management. What about examining his actions? Yeah. So okay, so we're gonna go into this here. Okay, so this is from the Mishnah, Tractate Sanhedrin, and we're gonna look at this is chapter 8, and we're going to look at a few of these sections within chapter 8. So, okay, here we go. A wayward and rebellious son. At what time can he become a wayward and rebellious son? So we're asking, so this goes back to that question. Is this an adult? Is this a child? What's going on? From when he grows 2 hairs until his beard grows full. This refers to the lower beard, not the upper beard, but this expression is used since the sages spoke in clean language. Okay, so here we're talking about puberty. We're talking about body hair. And so they're saying that like this person can only fall into this category of wayward and rebellious son if you've started these physical changes that go along with puberty, but not finished them, right? So you've begun, but you're not like fully hit the adult body, right? So you're kind of starting that process. So great, as it says, if a man has a son and not a daughter, a son and not a man, and a minor is exempt, for he has not entered the category of those obligated in the commandments. So already we see like an extreme narrowing of who is even eligible to be considered this wayward and rebellious son, because you can't be a child because, right, children aren't required, right? That's why we have a bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, b'nai mitzvah, because we celebrate when you become kind of like obligated in these commandments. So if you're, 6, if you're 10, you're not expected to be observing all the commandments. So you can't be punished for breaking them, right? Okay. And then at the other end, it says son and not an adult. So the rabbis are saying that means that this person still has to be in some ways a child, but again, they can't be a minor. So it means that they're like starting to become a man, but they aren't fully a man yet. So, right. So probably it's like from ages 12 to 12 and a half, right? So we have like now this like very narrow window of, when you can be this and fall into this category. Right. Okay. I'm seeing, okay, I'm just checking the comments. Yeah, because why we have a bar mitzvah, son of the commandment. Yeah, I mean, this idea of, we're obligated at the certain point, which is like, 12 or 13, which is to be kind of going along with like the age that you would hit puberty is, yeah, it's like this acknowledgement that there's a change and heading towards adulthood. Yeah. Okay, so great. So we have some limitations. I want you to keep track of all of these limitations we're about to place on this category. Great. Okay, so next, we're continuing on with the Mishnah. So from when is he liable to be stoned, right? So, okay, what's going to happen here? What does this 12 to 12 and a half year old boy, what does he need to do to qualify for this punishment? Well, he has to eat a tartemar of meat, we'll come back to what that means, and drinks half a log of Italian wine. Rabbi Yossi says a manette of meat and a log of wine. Okay, so a further restricting. So what does this 12 and a half year old boy have to do to qualify? He has to eat a certain amount of meat and drink a certain amount of wine. And if you look down at the bottom, I kind of did a little glossary. So tartemar comes from like tarte, it means like 3. So it's 3 of something. There is a debate about how much this is. Like I checked in the dictionaries and one was like, it's about 3 ounces. And one was like, no one knows. And one suggestion is that it's half a manet's worth, which we'll get to what a manet is. It's a lot. It's a good amount of meat, right? It's not just a bite. It's like at least a full burger, if not more. And then it has to drink half a log of Italian wine. So a log is 6 eggs worth. So 3 eggs worth of Italian wine. So that's at least a cup. I guess it depends on how big the eggs are, but I'm imagining, right? It's like, it's a fair amount of wine. And here it's interesting that this first opinion says half a log of Italian wine. And when I was looking up, okay, why Italian wine? It's because it's like the fanciest of the wines. So you have this like 12 and a half year old boy taking the fancy, like really expensive wine and like drinking a significant amount of that. It's not okay. And then Rabbi Yossi makes it even harder because he ups the quantities. So he says that he needs to eat a manette of meat, which is equal to the weight of 100 shekels. So 100 coins. And these aren't like today's shekels, they're even bigger. So if you think about 100 coins and that weight, like that's I don't know, I'm thinking of like a big stack of like gold coins, right? That's a good amount of meat and a log of wine, 6 eggs worth of wine. So it's very specific. He has to eat this certain amount of meat and a certain amount of wine. So it seems that he has to both disobey his parents in some way and be a certain age. And then on top of that, he has to like eat meat and drink wine, right? So the rabbis are really like pulling out a lot of things from this original text, right? Because it says he's a glutton and a drunkard. I'm just going to go back to that the original, sorry. Okay, right, because it says here in verse 20, the son of ours is a disloyal, but he is a glutton and a drunkard, right? So this person has to hit that requirement in order to have this death penalty. So they're saying, okay, what does it mean to be glutton and a drunkard? You have to drink this much wine and eat this much meat, but you have to do it together. Okay, so we're going back. Sorry for all the fast flipping. Okay, so, but we're going to further limit it, okay? Because it's not enough to just eat some meat and drink some wine together in this certain quantity, but also these are a whole other list of things that make it so that it doesn't count. So if he ate this at a mitzvah gathering, it's fine. It doesn't count. It doesn't qualify him for this death penalty. If he ate it in celebration of the month, again, if there's like a celebration feast, doesn't count. If he ate it as a tithe in Jerusalem, doesn't count. If he ate improperly slaughtered meat or meat from a wounded animal or creepy qualities, it doesn't count, right? It has to be kosher meat. If it's not kosher meat, it doesn't count. If he ate untithed produce or the first tithe from which truma had not been taken, or maser sheni or hekdesh that has not been redeemed, if he ate something in fulfillment of a commandment or something in violation of a transgression, right? So that's like the kind of the summary. So if he ate it because there was a celebration, it doesn't count. If he ate it and it's like something he shouldn't eat, right? So if it's something that hasn't been kosherly slaughtered, or it's something that hasn't had these different tithes taken out. And right, there's this idea that if the tithes, if these like different pieces haven't been taken out of the food, you're not supposed to eat it. You have to wait until you've taken these pieces out, this like maser sheni and things like that. Then because that's a transgression, it doesn't count. Okay, right? So we have a further limiting of what this means to be a ben sorer moreh. Okay, so I'm just gonna take a moment we can breathe to check the chat. So Ginger, yes. How do you know if it's 12 to 12 and a half? What a 12 and a half year. So I'm approximating, right? It's like the time when a boy will hit puberty. I know that it's different for different ages. So maybe it's like older, maybe it's like 13 to 13 and a half. And the piece about the beard is not talking about, it's talking about like body hair around the genital area, and not the top beard. That's how they talk about the top beard and the low beard. And so it's kind of a strange thing that the rabbis use to talk about like who's started puberty. And no, we don't check this. We never, like, that's not something we do. But that's just what they use to signify the beginning of puberty is just like you're starting to have that body hair. So I'm just saying 12 to 12 and a half is a shortcut, but it could be 13, it could be 11, right? Depending on when 14, 15, when the boy is hitting puberty. Yes. Okay. Great. Right. It says he does not heed us. Are the parents on the same page? That's what Tanya asked. Tanya, we are going to address that shortly. There is more about all of this. Okay. A good time to exercise portion control. Yes, Tanya, right? Exactly. If you eat less than a maneh of meat, you're fine. So exactly. If you've just had a serving, just have like a hamburger and that's enough. Stop there and then you don't have to worry. Okay, so we're going to keep going. Okay, so if he ate all foods but did not eat meat, so even if he was totally gluttonous, right, and he ate tons of whatever, all of the food in the house, but there was no meat, right, maybe it's a vegetarian household, doesn't count. If he drank all drinks but did not drink wine, like maybe he broke into the fancy scotch, doesn't matter, doesn't count. It has to be wine. Then he does not become a wayward and rebellious son until he eats meat and drinks wine, right? Again, we're saying it's very specific, putting very specific parameters on this concept. As it says in Deuteronomy, this is, again, going back to our original text. He is a glutton and a drunkard. And even so they're saying, okay, he has to eat meat and drink wine because that's what it means to be a glutton and a drunkard that our text is referring to. And even though there's no proof of this matter from a scriptural verse, there is a reference to the matter. So they're saying, so this is answering the question of like, how did the rabbis decide that being a glutton and a drunkard meant eating meat and drinking wine? And they take it from this text in Proverbs that says, be not among wine bibbers, among gluttonous eaters of flesh. So they say, okay, this is how we're drawing this conclusion. Okay, great. We're not going to dwell on that too long, but just there you go. So we need him to have started puberty, but not really finished puberty. We need him to have eaten a certain amount of meat and drink a certain amount of wine. It has to be meat, it has to be wine, it has to be at the same time. They have to be kosher, and it can't be for like a celebration, right? It has to just be like a regular day. Okay, but there's more. So we're putting on even more little limitations. If he stole from his father and ate in his father's domain, or if he stole from others and ate in others' domain, if he stole from others and ate in his father's domain, he does not become a wayward and rebellious son until he steals from his father and eats in others' domain. Rabbi Yossi Bar Yehuda says until he steals from his father and from his mother. Right. So again, we're adding to it is that there's this element of stealing, and he has to do it where he has to steal it from his father, from his parents, and eat it somewhere else. He has to like take it to a friend's house. And there you go. So again, further limiting, right? It's really easy to get out of this judgment because there's so many different things. Okay. And then even more, I'm going to go a little bit faster here. If his father wants to bring the son to court and his mother does not want, right? And apologies for the heteronormative language here, but it was a long time ago, right? We're talking about 100 CE that this stuff is being written down. So if his father wants to bring the son to court and his mother does not, or if his father does not want to bring and his mother does want, he does not become a wayward and rebellious son until they both want, right? And this goes back, I think, Tanya, it was a question you had, right? That both parents have to be in agreement that they want to bring their son to the elders of the town, right? They have to both decide that this son is, bad enough and kind of meets all of these checkpoints in order to qualify as this, right? So you have to get both parents to agree, which again, further limits it. And I imagine that, maybe at least one of those parents is, taking mercy on their son. And so right, they're not going to agree, but they both have to agree, right? So this is yet another condition we've put on who gets to be this wayward and rebellious son. And then Rabbi Yehuda says, if the mother were not appropriate for the father, he does not become a wayward and rebellious son. So there's something about this couple, something that has to happen with this couple, with the father and the mother, in order for the son to qualify as wayward and rebellious son. And we're going to see, what does that mean? So this is the Mishnah, and the Talmud is going to take up and say, okay, what is this? What does the Mishnah mean by not appropriate? What's going on here? But cliffhanger, because I want to look at the chat. I see a bunch of things happening here. Okay. Making it impossible to execute your children. Yes, exactly. So I think, yeah, you're onto something, right? They're trying to do something here. They're trying to kind of legislate it out because they are bothered by this idea of killing children. They're like, this can't possibly be what the Torah means. So it's making it very, very hard. And yeah, Wendy, won't there be a need for witnesses that the son did these things? Yeah, that's another piece, right? That's not necessarily in this text, but there is that idea of, you need witnesses to kind of corroborate. And then Susie, you say, isn't the word voice singular? Yes. Okay. So we say so we're going to actually come to that. That's going to be in a text we're going to see in a moment. So we can go into that even more, but good noticing. So Ginger, we're going to go into that. Sounds like a parent dealing with an addiction. Yeah, I mean, right, and again, I wouldn't say, we don't want to, I'm not advocating for the killing of anyone, right? There's different levels of how people can be difficult and what does it mean, and addiction can definitely play into that. There are a lot of out of control children in the Bible and nothing happened to them. Which I think is good, right? We don't want to just be killing children here. And clearly the rabbis agree, because that's why they're trying to kind of, right, shorten it and make it harder and harder for this thing to exist. Okay, so now we're going to look at, here from what Rabbi Yehuda has said about if the mother were not appropriate for the father, he does not become a wayward and rebellious son. So what does that mean and why? Okay, so here now we're in the Talmud. So, right, the Talmud is commenting on the Mishnah. It's from a little bit later. And so they ask, what does Rabbi Yehuda mean in the Mishnah here when he speaks of the mother as being not appropriate for the father? Well, Rabbi Yehuda is saying that the boy's mother must be identical to his father in several aspects. Okay, what, right? The Gemara comments, so that means this text also comments, it's also taught in a Baraita, which is a piece of material that's from a similar time as the Mishnah, but not in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says, if his mother was not identical to his father in voice, appearance, and height, he does not become a stubborn and rebellious son. Okay, so there's something about how the parents have to be similar in voice, appearance, and height. And why? Well, we're going to see. So what is the reason for this? Here we go. What is the reason for this? As the verse states, he will not obey our voice, which is kolenu, which indicates that they both have the same voice. And since we require that they be identical in voice, we also require that they be identical in appearance and height. Right? So when the parents bring the son out and say, right, this is when they're talking to the elders of the town, and they're saying, our son is rebellious and he's a glutton and a drunkard, and he will not obey our voice. And the word for voice, right, is singular. It says kolenu, which means our voice, instead of our voices, which I think would be kolotenu. So right, what the Talmud here is pulling out is because it says voice singular, it means that they must have the same voice, right? So in order for their son not to listen to their one singular voice, oh, sorry, my doorbell just rang. According to one voice, their voices need to be the same. Okay, so that's another further addition to, okay, so right, even if the son manages to be the right age and drink the right amount of wine and eat the right amount of meat and do it at the right time and steal from his father and eat it in another's domain, the parents also have to have, so even if all of that, if the parents don't sound similar, which is pretty unlikely, right? Like, I don't know a lot of people that have the same voice, then it doesn't count, right? They're disqualified again. So we have all of these conditions that the son has to meet, and then all these conditions that the parents have to meet. Okay, so there you go. Yeah, could it mean the parents must be on the same page according to childbearing? Yeah, I mean, there's definitely that idea, right? That's what we saw also in kind of just the last text, that the father and mother have to agree. So they have to agree, and they also have to like sound similar and be similar in a way. Okay. And then we continue on. So we're still going with all of these limitations. They warn him, so the parents, who have to have the same voice and like a similar physical appearance, have to warn him in front of 3 and lash him. Right, so we're getting lashes, and that was a punishment given out in rabbinic times. Although we don't really know how much these punishments were actually given out and how much it was just kind of talked about in the Mishnah as like, if we were to do this, this would be something we do. And that's a whole other rabbit hole we're not going down today. But so anyway, so here we have this idea that there is this warning step, which someone I know mentioned a while ago, of like maybe they're warning. So they bring him in front of 3, right, of these elders of the town, and he gets lashes. So there's this preliminary punishment to kind of be like, okay, like, don't go further because, we don't want to keep going, right? So he has this first warning punishment. And if he repeats his misdeeds, so this seems to mean that he has to do all of this stuff, right? He has to drink the wine and eat the meat. He has to do it twice, right? He does it once. His parents agree. They have the same voice. They bring him to the elders. He gets punished. And then he has to do that exact same thing again. Then he's judged by a court of 23. And he is not stoned until the original 3 judges are present, right? As it says, this is our son, he who was lashed before you. If he flees before the verdict has been reached, and then his lower beard grows full, right? So we're like full, finished puberty, he is exempt. But if once the verdict was reached, he fled, and then his lower beard grew full, he is still liable, right? So if the son who has started puberty but not finished leaves and the verdict hasn't been reached, and then he like finishes puberty, he's no longer liable, right? He's escaped the judgment, but only if the verdict has reached and then he fled, then he's still liable. But so again, we have just these more, we're just piling on all of these specifics for what has to happen for this to actually take place, for this Ben Sorero Moreh. Okay, and so then the Talmud is continuing to make limitations, right? So we just saw the Mishnah, and now the Talmud is commenting on that, and they're like, okay, where did we get lashes from? Like, where did that even come from? That wasn't in the original, and I'm just going to kind of skim through this because it's not as important, but they kind of show that there are these words vayisru, that's both in this text and also later in the same Torah portion. And they say, okay, because that later one means lashes, then we're going to read that back into the early one. And there you go. So that's how they get to lashes, even though it's not necessarily clear, but they have to try and like defend themselves to like hold their argument up and say, no, this is, even though it seems like it comes out from nowhere, it actually doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from somewhere. It's based in something. Okay. And I'm going to breathe one more time before we go on. So I know we're talking about kind of, right, the right, Greta and Tanya talking about how like the mother and the father are both kind of held in equal standing, which is not always the case when we're talking about, a long time ago, right? A lot of times it's like the father was in charge, and that's kind of what it was. But here, yeah, the father and the mother both have to be on the same page. So it's not just what the father says, it's both of them, and they both have to agree, and they both have to use their voice and all of that. Exactly. And yeah, the piece about like height and things might play into, there's this idea that the parents, and we'll see once we finish this, I'm gonna take us back to the original text so we can kind of like see where it came from. But the parents have to bring him out, and that's what it says, they bring him out to the elders. And so there's the idea of like, how do they bring him out? They have to bring him out equally, and so in order to do that, they have to be of equal height. Right, so there you go. Okay, so now we're in the end of the Talmud, and so it says, Rabbi Shimon says, and is it simply due to the fact that the boy ate a tartamar of meat and drank a half log of Italian wine that his father and his mother shall take him out to stone him? Right, so Rabbi Shimon saying, wait, so right, this is going way back, saying, wait, if the child just ate, the meat and drank the wine, that's not enough reason to stone him. That doesn't make sense. Like, where did that come from? Rather, he says, there has never been a stubborn and rebellious son, and there never will be one in the future. So Rabbi Shimon saying, this thing doesn't exist. It's not, right, like this is not even something that's possible to happen, right? Like we've put so many limitations on it. This isn't a thing. And so, and why then, I'm continuing to read on, and why then was the passage relating to a stubborn and rebellious son written in the Torah? Right? Okay, so if this person doesn't exist, and this is, like, why is it mentioned at all? And Rabbi Shimon says, so that you may expound upon new understandings of the Torah and receive reward for your learning. Let's read that again. So that you may expound upon new understandings of the Torah and receive reward for your learning. And so saying, okay, this problematic section in our Torah is not there because we're talking about actually killing a child. It's because we wanted, like this, the intention was so that we would expound, that we would develop these interpretations and do all of this study and receive reward for your learning, right? That was the whole point. This whole time, that's what we wanted to do, is we wanted to have this for learning, but not because such a child actually exists, and not because we want to go around killing rebellious children. And now, of course, this is the downer where Rabbi Yonatan, of course. So we have this like beautiful end, and I was debating if I should put this last piece in, but it's okay. I like disagreement. So Rabbi Yonatan here is going to disagree. He's in the parentheses. So it's also from the same text, says, this is not so. Like, no, stubborn and rebellious child, this does exist, as I saw one. I was once in a place where a stubborn and rebellious son was condemned to death, and I even sat on his grave after he was executed. So Rabbi Yonatan's like the Debbie Downer here, and it's like, no, actually this exists. But I like Rabbi Shimon's interpretation much better because, right, it's this idea, hold on, I'm just going to stop the share. Okay. It's this idea that this is not a thing. We're not killing children, and it's there for us to study. And I think that this is a really interesting piece of like, what is one way that rabbis in our tradition, in the Mishnah and the Talmud, right, in our oral tradition, what's one way that they dealt with things that maybe were problematic? And here, right, they've effectively legislated this rule out of existence. Of course, now we don't have the death penalty in Jewish communities don't have the death penalty. There is in different states and countries, but like we're not executing people but yeah, so they've legislated this piece out of existence in a way, and I think this is just like a really fascinating look at what are some of the ways that a Jewish legal system can exist and can allow for change, right? Because if we're just taking what it says in the Torah, we're killing kids. But if we're looking at the Torah as informed by the Mishnah and the Talmud and all of these centuries of discussion and commentary, we see that actually no, this is not something. And I appreciate that, just like me reading the Torah, being bothered by this idea of like killing kids. So too the rabbis were as well, and they wanted to kind of make it go away, but you can't just erase things from the Torah. So how else do we deal with problematic texts? Yes. Yeah, Wendy says, I think these Mishnaic and Talmudic texts are so amazing because it shows that Torah and Jewish law were evolving even in the Mishnaic times, and it continues to evolve today. Exactly, right? So there's this evolution, right? Jewish law does not stay the same. I think if it stayed the same always, we wouldn't be here today. It has to be able to move and adapt. And here is an example of that pretty early on, and then seeing that process. Okay. Oh, it's almost time. I'm sorry that I guess we're not going to really have time for people to share out loud. I apologize, but thank you for sharing in the chat. If anyone has any last words they'd like to share in the chat. Yeah, it makes you wonder how they dealt with sons who had socially deviant behavior, Tanya says. Yeah, I mean, I imagine that there were other punishments and disciplinary things they could do, but we're not like legislating of the killing of them. So there you go. So that's Ben Sorero Moreh. This is kind of one of those like iconic Talmud pieces. This is one of the first like things I studied when I was starting Talmud, because I think it's just a really nice way to show how it goes from Torah to Mishnah, then to Talmud, and to see how things go in that evolution. Yes. So lots of good questions, lots of things to keep thinking about. And yeah, thank you so much for learning with me. I really loved learning with you, and thanks for your comments and your thoughts. And yeah, be nice to your kids if you have them, or just kids in general that are around. Just be nice.